Hello, everyone. It's my sincere privilege to be the moderator of this important panel. When my dear colleague, Kara, at Marriott approached me with this opportunity, I was excited to take part because of my own professional experience around being one of the few senior executives, Asian of descent, in my own industry. Let's start by naming what's going on out there. For many Asian professionals, there's a deeply held belief, and we heard that earlier as well, that good work should speak for itself. But too often in corporate America, it isn't enough. It needs a little bit more than that. Many of you know this firsthand, the frustration of being possibly overlooked, even when you've delivered results. And when promotions, opportunities, and leadership roles are on the line, the cost of believing that myth can be high. So what does it actually take to overcome these challenges? What mindset shifts and what concrete actions can help us grow our visibility and influence while staying true to who we are? That's exactly what we'll explore in today's conversation. With that in mind, I'm thrilled to introduce our esteemed panelists. First, Anne Chow, a transformative business leader who made history as the first woman of color CEO at AT&T's 140-year history, leading a $35 billion global business with over 35,000 employees. Today, she serves as lead director of Franklin Covey and sits on the board of 3M and CXS. Anne is also a national best-selling author of the book Lead Bigger, The Transformative Power of Inclusion, and has twice been named the Fortune's Most Powerful Women in Business. Next, Whitney Johnson, ranked among, Whitney Johnson, ranked among the top 10 management thinkers in the world by Thinkers 50. Whitney is the CEO of Disruption Advisors and a Wall Street Journal best-selling author of the book Smart Growth, Build an A-Team, and Disrupt Yourself. She's a former Wall Street analyst and co-founder of the Disruptive Innovation Fund with Harvard's Clayton Christensen. And of course, we have Israa Nasir, a psychotherapist, writer, and founder of WellGuide, a very popular digital community for mental health awareness. She's been featured in Forbes, Harvard Business Review, NBC, and Time, and has spoken at major organizations like Google, Instagram, and Microsoft. Israa is the author of Toxic Productivity, her debut book on breaking free from burnout culture. Please join me in welcoming Anne, Whitney, Israa. Let's get this great conversation started. Israa and Whitney, you both talk about the power of owning your narrative, not just what you do, but who you are as a whole person. How can professionals think about crafting and communicate a personal brand that reflects both their strengths and their story?
All right. Well, first of all, I'm really glad that you have notes because I have notes too. And this is, I think actually this is an important piece is talking about our strengths is that sometimes people are really good at just talking off the cuff and sometimes people need notes. And when you're going into a conversation, if you need notes, then use notes. And if you don't need notes, then don't use them. All right, so here's what I want to say on the personal brand. The first thing is there was a wonderful piece of research that was put out probably about 15 years ago by Boris Groysberg at Harvard Business School. He wrote an article titled How Star Women Build Portable Skills. And what was interesting about this research is he found that when he studied men, they could not change Wall Street firms and still be successful. But when he studied women or underrepresented groups generally, they were able to move from Goldman Sachs to Merrill Lynch, and I had this experience because I was an analyst at Merrill Lynch, and still be successful. And the reason they were able to still be successful was that because they couldn't build a network internally, they built a network externally out of necessity, and then that network helped them when they wanted to change firms. So what does that have to do with the conversation that we're having today and building a personal brand? Well, it has to do with the fact that when you can get external validation outside of your organization, in those moments where you're feeling invisible, you take that external validation, you can leverage that into validation and visibility internally inside of your firm. The second thing that I would say, I'll say two other things and then toss it over to you, Israa, is that when you think about your brand, oftentimes your best part of your brand is what's even invisible to you and the parts that you actually may be ashamed of. So, for example, I'll give you something from my own experience. I remember early in my career, I was working on Wall Street, I was in investment banking. We were having a dinner with some friends. And they asked me what my story was. And I became sort of coy and cagey about how I ended up becoming a Wall Street equity analyst or investment banking analyst. And afterwards, one of the people said, she was kind of like, why wasn't she answering the question? And my friend said to them, well, you know, she started as a secretary and she's kind of embarrassed that she started as a secretary. She majored in music, she started as a secretary, she didn't come in the front door to be an investment banking analyst. And this person who had walked in the front door said, if that was my story, I would tell everyone. And we just had that experience of listening to Tiffany. Her story, probably at some point in her life, she was not proud of. But now she is tremendously proud of that. And that story is what makes her brand uniquely hers. And so the last thing that I would say is that when you know what your story is, and when you're feeling, once you know what your story is, own it, be proud of it, leverage it, because that's what's going to allow you to build your brand. Okay, over to you, Israa. I could go on all day, and Tiffany and Christina's going like, okay, Whitney, stop. Go,
no,
Israa.
I'm feeling very inspired by your story because you share how there are parts of us that we can feel really ashamed of, but you never really know who is seeing strength or resilience or interest or curiosity in that part of you, right? So when I think of a personal brand, I essentially want to answer the question, how does somebody feel after they leave with an interaction with me? And that is the core of a personal brand, is how do people feel about you after they interact with you? How do people speak about you when you're not in the room? And how do people remember you? And that really is coming through two ideas, which is competence and context. So when you're thinking about building your personal brand, think about the things that you are competent at, right? And then think about the context of who you are, and that might include pieces that you are not very proud of yet. And I'll share a very quick story because I think it might be relevant to people here. In today's day and age, I mean, everyone has something that they are calling like a side hustle. And a lot of times when you work in a corporate environment, you feel compelled to hide that part of you. And I'll share a story about my husband who, you know, is a Wall Street investment banker, very serious, you know, work environment. But when he was a VP, he used to do stand-up. He still does stand-up comedy, right? But as a VP, he would hide that from everybody. He would block coworkers on Instagram. He would just make sure nobody knew. He would run from work to do a set and change on the way because he didn't want people to see him in a suit in a comedy club. And there was a lot of shame around having these two seemingly disparate identities. But somehow a managing director found out that he does comedy, and he got called into the office. And his managing director said, oh, so I found out that you do stand-up in the evening. And his heart dropped because he thought that he was going to get, you know, reamed out for being unprofessional. But the managing director instead said, we would love for you to host the managing director dinner. And then he went on as a VP, the only VP in the room for managing directors. For 4 years, he hosted that dinner. And he would do roasts, he would do like all of these stand-up bits, and he became known as that guy, and it helped propel his career and his personal brand and how people thought about him so much. And, he spent so long hiding it. And I think that's what you should really think about when it comes to context. We're all very good at competence, but think about the context from where you come, who you are, what you love, and kind of infuse it into how people remember you at work.
And it helped him get promoted, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And he's a managing director now, and he always asks people what they do for fun and to see how he can pull that out for his team, because it just makes us better.
Thank you for that. Those are both great stories, a lot of takeaways from that. And of course, as soon as we start talking about personal branding, many people start to worry, am I being authentic? Or am I just performing? Because there's sometimes that thought that flutters through our minds. Let's dig into that tension a little bit more. Anne and Israa, we hear a lot about building a personal brand, and we just talked a little bit about that now. But how do you distinguish between showing up authentically and feeling like you're performing a version of yourself to fit others' expectations?
Shall I go first? Okay, great. Okay. We'd love hearing more. Thank you all, and thank you all for spending your day here with us. It's really an honor to be here with Asia Society and on this stage with these incredible leaders. Authenticity, here's how I think about it from a leadership perspective. I've always believed that if you expect, right, leadership is about people. And so if you expect your people to perform at their best, how can you expect them to perform at their best if they are not actually at their best? Which means very comprehensively, mentally, physically, authentically, right? And our role as a leader is to create that environment. But here's one of the things that I think many folks get wrong about authenticity. And it is a word that is very near and dear to my heart. It is a word that if you were to ask me what I hoped my personal brand would be, authenticity would be one of the top 5 things that I hope people would say about me, that I also believe in myself, is that I absolutely believe that your authenticity is tied to and aligned with your values and the guiding principles of your life, your character and your integrity. However, what you did not hear me say was that your authenticity is tied to your personality style, the way you relate to people, right? So here's a big safety tip in terms of differences. It is so vitally important to bring your whole self to work, to be your authentic self, to live and work with your values and principles as the North Star. However, you don't have to show your whole self. Okay? Given that leadership is all about people, and the most important, most powerful thing in the world is human connection, leadership is about aligning with others, relating to others, building relationships, whether they're transactional or meaningful. And so you have an obligation, if you're going to choose to be a leader, to figure out what it's going to take to relate to connect with that other person. It does not mean that you are being inauthentic, right? It simply means you're doing the work to be a leader, to forge that relationship. I'll give you a quick example. I love coming to the city because I'm from Jersey, so I can actually amplify and step up the pace.
Jersey.
Yeah, go Jersey. So this is like coming home. So I went to school in New York. And so, but 10 years ago, I had an opportunity to move to Texas. And I will confess to all of you here that it is not a place that I ever thought that I'd move to, ever, in a million years. In fact, I actually told many people at our company that I would never move. Right? Never say never. Opportunity is opportunity. But what I learned in that pivot, in that shift, was first 6 months of living in Texas, where interpersonal relationships, personality style, what was expected, how to be effective in one-on-ones or one-to-manys was different than it was out here, right? So it took me a couple of months to adapt my style to become more effective in my role. Was I being inauthentic? Absolutely not. I was trying to be the best person I could be, the best leader I could be. I was trying to connect with others so that we could get the job done and perform as a high-performing team. And so it is very different in terms of being your authentic self, bringing your authentic self to work, versus showing all aspects of yourself, right? Which is just really about interpersonal flexibility. So that's how I think about it.
And there is a difference, and you explained it so well. I love that. Very, very refreshing to hear it. Thank you.
I won't add too much more because I completely agree. Authenticity is about discernment and adaptability. I think the only thing I will add is whether you are a leader by title or you are a leader by role in your company and how you make people feel, I think authenticity requires boundaries, and that's the piece we don't often think about. And we, especially in, contemporary culture, we do believe that being authentic requires you to reveal everything all the time and only be in places that are aligned with your values and only work with people who you can see eye to eye to, and that's the only way you can be authentic. And as a therapist, I have a lot of early career clients who struggle with this idea that authenticity is all or nothing, it's completely black or white. But a really core part of being an authentic leader is having boundaries, both around energy, space, time, when it comes, to how you work in a team together. Because somebody who doesn't have boundaries will struggle to be authentic in the right places at the right time. And quite frankly, trying to be 100% authentic all the time throughout all of your life is extremely exhausting, and it's also not beneficial. So just like you said, having that discernment of who gets to see which parts of you and when is not manipulative. It's actually strategic, especially in the workplace.
That's such an important reminder. That's great. Thank you.
Hey, Christina, could I add something on personal brand? Because I thought, Israa, as you were saying, you had an opportunity to work with many early-stage career professionals. It struck me that if someone were to talk to me about my personal brand when I was in my 20s or even my early 30s, I would have had no idea how to even get started. So I thought I might give you all a possible homework assignment if this idea of personal brand is a little abstract to you. And I've actually done this exercise at different points in my career. So the exercise is this. Pick 5 words, okay? Not 3. 3 is too easy. 5 words that you hope, that you aspire, that you believe your personal brand, like who you are, right? For me, one would be authenticity, another one would be caring, whatever those 5 words may be. Go ask other people that you care about, what are 5 words that they choose to describe you? Ask your boss, ask your children, ask your partner, right? Ask different stakeholders and see how aligned that is. It will tell you where you are if you're showing up as who you aspire to be. It'll also give you incredible insight into how you're being perceived. So I've just found that to be just a really simple exercise. And yes, of course, you should take full advantage of whatever organization you work for, surveys and feedback on all of those structured things. But this 5-word thing is incredibly insightful.
What was your surprise?
What was my surprise? That my children thought I was embarrassing.
Oh, boo.
For those of you who are parents, we live to embarrass our children, which is something I've promised them, even though they're in the workforce today. But yeah.
Well, thank you for the homework. So guys, you heard her. Anne said 5 words, and then ask people around you and see if there's a match between those 5 words.
And actually, just building on that, I think it's interesting too. It can be people that know you really well, but it can also be people that you've just met. Yep. So you may meet someone over the course of today, and maybe that's an exercise today as you're talking to each other, is just what words come to mind, because sometimes we exude much more just in the 5 minutes that we meet someone than we realize that we do, and so maybe do the homework during the day.
And to continue on that subject, let's talk about the very real risk of putting yourself out there. We talked about being authentic, we talked about maybe adapting to who's there so that you can do your work. When people start to assert themselves, they often face pushback, sometimes subtle, sometimes direct. Anne and Whitney, how do you recommend professionals navigate that tension between staying visible and avoid being seen as too much?
You're going to let me go first. Thanks, Anne.
I feel like we're both a little bit too much sometimes.
Okay, all right. Okay. Well, it's interesting. I have a story around this where I learned the hard way. So I'm working at Merrill Lynch as an equity analyst, and I had a really good year, like a really good year. My stock calls were spot on, et cetera. And so I went to one of my best friend's husbands, who happens to be Chinese, and I was like, so what do I do? And he's investment banking. And he's like, well, here's what you do. You go and you say, here are my metrics. I did, I'm top 10%. I expect to get paid in the top 10%. I had this conversation with my manager. I'm all prepared. And he says to me, Whitney, stop complaining and go back and do your job. I was like, okay, I guess that playbook worked for him, but it does not work for me. So I think, and we probably all had this experience in different ways, where it's just so dispiriting to have that happen. So I think that that's one thing I do want to call out, is that the experience that you may have of people wanting you to act differently and expecting, we know that women in general have to be 2.2 times more competent than a man just to be on equal footing. It's exacerbated for women of color. Women are judged on track record, men on potential. So this whole water that you're swimming in, we're swimming in as underrepresented groups. It's real. And so I want to acknowledge that, because I think for early in my career, I thought, oh no, the glass ceiling, that's not real. Oh, come on, people. Just, if you were really competent like me, and it's real. But then there's an expectation of, like, you need to start to recognize there's still parts that you have control over. So here's where I want to go to. Sometimes this whole invisibility works its way like a worm into our head, and we start to believe it's also true. And so then we don't know how to advocate for ourselves. What I have learned, and it turns out I end up coaching a lot of women of color. I don't quite know how that happened. Maybe it's because I talk about disruption. I have learned is that how do you talk about what you're doing in a way that frames it so that it's a win to your manager and it's a win to the company. And I'll give you a specific playbook for how to do this, and I tried it out just this last week. Sometimes your manager can't see what you're actually doing. It's invisible to them, and so the way you can frame it, and here's what I did. I sit on a board of a company called Embark. They have a new CEO. We just did the CEO search. Well, there's something that I did in the CEO search that he wouldn't know about. I thought, okay, I need to practice this. So I said, hey, Felice, so he's Cuban-American. We did the CEO search, super exciting, but something that I did that you may not be aware of, but I thought you might want to know so you know how to use me and deploy me in the future, is this. There was a board committee, founder of the company, former chairman of Deloitte, and myself. Very different personalities, very different strengths. I assessed where we were and thought through, how do I make sure that we work together in a splendid way? As a consequence, we did. We were able to put together a rigorous search process. We were able to hire you, so that was good. And it allowed him to say, oh, here's what she knows how to do. She wasn't saying it of, look at me. Here's what Whitney knows how to do in service of what we're trying to get done. So, in summary, don't let the invisibility get into your head. Figure out how what you're doing is in context of the person you're talking to and how those skills serve them, so that it's not look at me, but it's in service of the people around you. And that's going to allow you to move to a place of visibility that feels okay to everybody.
That's a solid technique. Thank you.
Okay, so my guess is that every single one of us have been called or described as too much in our own way, right? So my true confessional moment here is that I've been called many things in my 30-plus year of career. I've been called too aggressive, too direct. I have, in fact, been called a DEI hire, so I'll put that out there, even of late, by the way. And so...
Even of late?
Oh, even of late, yes. So I get now.
So much for track record and
Yeah.
Wow.
By the way, okay, for those of you who have found yourself in that position, and my guess is you may find yourself in that position at some point in your career if you've not heard it explicitly said to you. It may be being said behind closed doors. I don't want you to worry about it. Why do I not want you to worry about it? First of all, the people who are asserting that view about you, they don't know you, okay? Two, they're attempting to allege and take down the fact that you earned the right to be exactly where you are, all right? For those of you who have people leadership experience already or aspire to, how many of us want to actually hire somebody that can't do the job? Let me just ask that question again. Does anybody here want to hire somebody on their team who isn't the best person for the job? Okay, right? So in actuality, when someone says that, it's a huge insult to the hiring manager, right? And in my 30-plus year in tech, I had 26 different bosses. The majority of them, over 17 different roles, the majority of them were white men, right? And so it's kind of a nonsensical assertion. But back to, what do you do if someone says you're too much? Someone says that you're too direct, or you're too aggressive, or you're too this, or you're too that. To me, the answer is, it depends, all right? If it is your boss or somebody who is very important to you in the context of this, the stakeholdering of where you are in your career, you have to pay close attention to it, right? I've had occasion where, this one's kind of a crazy story. I was with a new boss, and what I would do whenever I got a new boss would set up a one-on-one, right, with a very structured set of things to cover just to get grounded. I would not ever talk about my family, but it was very, very professional until I got a sense of the person. And I remember with this one boss, I went through the intro one-on-one, completely professional topics. And the feedback that I got from HR, not from him directly, was that I talked about my family too much. I didn't mention my family once, okay?
Really?
Yeah, so that instance showed me the power of perception. He heard something that wasn't there, but the important thing is that I now understood that that was his perception of me, which meant that I had to overcompensate and adjust my approach to him, right? And in the context of leadership, in the context of life, it is all about relationships. It is all about connection, right? Every business is a people business. And thus, I have found the way to deal with these kinds of perspectives or perceptions is to simply work through them, acknowledge them, process them. Many of them you'll throw away, right? The person who will come up to you after you do a speech and say, wow, you're so articulate. Is that a compliment? Is that a backhanded microaggression? What is it, all right? I don't know. Is somebody like me not supposed to be articulate? I don't know, right? I don't know, right? So you filter it out, right? And what I would say, a lot of this is trial and error, right? This is how you learn to build relationship. It is how you learn to communicate. It is how you develop your full repertoire, right, of interpersonal capabilities, right? And the more people you can, this is something I've told my children and will continue to, is the more people you can relate to, the more successful and the more impactful you will be. Right?
Very powerful message. And also, I took note of, it depends who tells you. If it's somebody that you trust, it's actually advice so that you can grow and all of that. And if it's somebody that doesn't know you, then there's a little bit of work to be done around that. Thank you. The way others perceive us isn't always fair or kind, as we just heard now. Let's talk about how to handle the emotional impact of being misperceived or underestimated. Israa, I'm looking at you. Recognizing how others perceive you can be disappointing or even painful, especially when those perceptions feel unwelcomed or based on assumptions. Israa, how do you recommend people manage the emotional impact of that?
Yeah, I'll first add one last thing to what you were saying, because I love that perspective shift. And it's connected to this too. When someone has a perception of you and you evaluate it, and you evaluate the person who's giving you that feedback, you can always try to reframe it as data about the environment you're in. And that really can help you to adjust and be strategic instead of taking it personally. And so that's kind of like how we buffer against the emotional impact of somebody having a negative or unwanted perception of you. And unfortunately, I'm pretty sure everybody here has experienced it. I know I have. I know you've both shared your stories. But I think the most successful people are the people who can do two things really, really well. And this applies at work, but it also applies elsewhere in life. One is when something difficult happens, they're able to acknowledge the impact, name the emotional experience, and process it. And then they're able to be action-oriented. So I've worked with people who can name the pain really well, and then they get stuck in it. They're not able to move into action. Or I've worked with people who skip naming it and they go right into action. They go right into problem solving. But we really need both of those things in order to buffer against the emotional impact of somebody having a perception about you that's not true or what you don't believe is true. And essentially once you kind of regulate your emotion around it, so you name it, you process it, and you create cognitive distance from it. So you create a mental distance from it, and that requires you to absorb what they've said and then rephrase it to yourself. So if somebody says, Israa, you are too much, you do too many things, there's just too much going on in your life. I can absorb that, and I can say, maybe I do too much. Maybe I should streamline some of the things I do. Or I can say, they think I do too much. And so immediately that externalizes that feedback. And, when we belong to marginalized identities, whatever it is, it can feel even more big. Like it feels bigger when somebody gives you this type of feedback. So I think like having identity-safe networks is really, really important to help manage that emotion. And an identity-safe network is a group that supports you, who is either identity aligned to you by some vertical or is an ally to you, because that research has shown improves a lot of resilience, especially in the workplace. I will switch gears and quickly share a framework on how we can have strategic self-awareness when it comes to somebody giving us feedback that we don't appreciate or don't align with. And it's essentially, the framework is called REAL. It's an acronym. And the first thing, in order to buffer ourselves from a perception that we don't align with, we have to first really recognize what we are, who we are. So you have to have a lot of clarity about your communication style, your leadership style, your collaboration style, what you stand for, what your values are. That's the first most important step in protecting yourself. And then you want to do what Anne mentioned, which is evaluate what's been said. Really see if there's truth in it. How did I get perceived this way in this room? Why did they think this? Why would they say this? And kind of like do that analysis. And once you have that analysis, you really want to make sure that you can then adapt. And that's where that idea of authenticity with boundaries comes in. You recognize certain people see you a certain way, so you can adapt to make sure that it shifts that for them. Now, that doesn't mean you perform. It means you shift something about the way you present, what you do, where you show up. And the final one is that you leverage that. You leverage those actions so that you can shift the way people view you. And I'll just share a very, very quick example, which is this framework. If there's anyone in here who works with me or has worked with me, you'll know that I'm not the loudest person in a meeting. I'm not the most, vocally opinionated person in a meeting. I often am very quiet in meetings. I'll take my time to really think about what's being said before I say something. And I'm quiet because I'm thoughtful, not because I have nothing to say. But in a high stress meeting, fast environments, that in my early career, people often thought I had nothing to say or that I was unprepared or I didn't really have something to offer. And so how I adapted after taking in this information was I'll often preface in a meeting that I'm not speaking because I'm thinking. And I'll say, I'm going to pause before I respond to this, or I'm going to respond to this in 10 minutes. I want to gather my thoughts and be really accurate about what I say. And that has really helped people see that I do have things to say, but I'm just taking my time. And so I didn't change my value. I didn't become the loudest person in the room because that would be inauthentic to me. But I did shift something about my communication so that people saw me in a different way. And I think being strategic about it, once you navigate the emotions, can be incredibly powerful.
That's a wonderful tip. Thank you for that. And you mentioned it earlier. One powerful way to counter that is by building external networks. People in communities who can validate you, sponsor you, and open new doors. Whitney, let's go deeper on that strategy. You've observed that women you've coached often build power by cultivating those external networks. Why is that so important? And how can professionals at any level begin building those networks today?
Such a great question. So a couple thoughts come to me. Number one is that you already have a pretty vast network just right where you're sitting right now. You have a network of the people that you're working with, the network of people you went to college with, the network of, for those of you who have parents, which is all of you, their network, and sometimes it's more expansive, sometimes it's not so much. I think one of the things that's very important is to be willing to tap into that network, to be willing to say, here's what I'm trying to do, and be very upfront. I'm trying to get X, Y, or Z done. Here's how I could use your help. And you surprise and delight them with the initiative and the ask and the clarity of the ask, and be willing to ask for that help. It's very interesting for me. So I have 2 college-age children, and my husband's a college professor, and I am shocked by how infrequently these students will ask for help. They just won't ask for help. And the network is just sitting there. It's like this tree of oranges and grapefruits and lemons and limes, and they won't pick the fruit. And so that would be one thing that I would say. The second thing I would encourage you to do, it would be disingenuous of me to say that I have not had support. Clayton Christensen, Harvard Business School, he has been a supporter. He's passed away, but being able to leverage that has been very important and valuable. So the other thing I would say to you is, as you go through your work, find people who you are doing such good work. You're so enthusiastic about who they are. You're so interesting. You're so exciting. You're so delightful. And each one of you are in your own way, as we've been talking about, that they want to sponsor you. They want to say, hey, go talk to her, because it makes them look good. So again, you've got a network right where you are. Be willing to state your intention of what you're trying to figure out, and then recognize that there are people who will sponsor you if you make it interesting and attractive and exciting for them to sponsor you. And I mean that in an informal way. So just a couple thoughts on that.
Amazing. I don't know about you, but I can listen to these 3 all day long. This is amazing, amazing information. Before we head into the Q&A
Christina,
portion.
sorry to interrupt.
Yes, go ahead.
I selfishly have a question for you about this. And I think it might be interesting for the folks here as well. So earlier you mentioned that you've ended up coaching, a lot of women of color. And can you speak to the benefit of having a sponsor or a mentor who is identity aligned, and then the benefit of having somebody who is not identity aligned? Because I think sometimes people can get a little lost in that, and I personally would also love to hear your perspective.
That's a great question. And I think the answer is it depends on what you're working on. I do find oftentimes from an identity alignment standpoint, I'm able to be very helpful when I'm coaching people who are people of faith. So I'm a person of faith, they're a person of faith. It doesn't necessarily need to be the same religion, but a person of faith. That identity alignment to be able to talk about God, for example, is very, very helpful. Depending on what they're working on, right? And so then your question of if it's not identity aligned, I think I would say, even though I am not a person of color, because I have been and continue to be a woman, it turns out that I do understand what it's like to be in an underrepresented place. And so I can speak to a place of, here's the experience, I can validate it, here's what I've learned, and be able to help move people forward. And to again, because I've focused on disruption my whole career, I think there's that element of when you're a person of color and you make your way in the world, you are by definition a disruptor. And so I think that's really powerful as well. So I think, again, Israa, it really depends on what you're trying to get done.
Thank you.
I got to jump in on this one too, just
Please.
because I have a strong opinion about it. You need both, okay? You need both. I think that whether you're considering how you want to intentionally network, right, and build relationships and connections, or how you seek out mentors or how you earn sponsors, you want to be careful of not creating an echo chamber that's so loud that you miss out on what is happening out there, right? You know, leading bigger is about widening your perspectives to have greater performance and greater impact. And the only way you can continually widen your perspective, right? And if you were to ask me, hey, Anne, you know, how did you navigate the career that you have had and the career that you're having, this is a constant intentional purpose on my part to continually widen my perspectives, to make sure that I'm learning from people who are very, very different than me, right? And depending on the industry that you're in, the roles that you aspire to, odds are, you know, at some point in your career, you're going to be in the minority. And so you've got to have sponsorship. You have to have mentorship from whatever the existing power base is and looks like. And you've got to be really purposeful. Look, I don't play golf, right? And had I known that what my corporate career was going to be, I would have learned to play golf. Not realistic for an immigrant, you know, for the child of an immigrant. But in hindsight, right, it would have given me so many opportunities to network and be in conversations that, because I didn't necessarily play golf, that I was not part of, right? It doesn't mean that I was ineffective. It just, that was an opportunity that I could not pursue. So I would just ask that you widen your aperture when you think about looking for support, looking for mentorship, looking for sponsorship, looking for camaraderie, right? Asking for help. The more diverse your network is, right, the more diverse your capabilities as a leader continue to develop, the more successful and the more impactful, and quite frankly, the more joyous you will be.
Christina, I have
couldn't
to
agree
say
more.
something. I have to say something. Okay, I mean, part of
Get
this
me in
is
trouble.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I'm not Asian, right? And I'm here, so bravo to Tiffany for curating this, but here's what I want to add. I have had many experiences where people would say, who I know have a vast network, and they say, there's this woman I need to introduce you to. And I thought, but in your network, there's probably 90 men and 10 women, and you want to introduce me to another woman. So being intentional about, well, who else might you introduce me to? And then here's the tip for us in this room that we have control over. All of us in this room have people that we can introduce to other people. When you're thinking about introducing people, introduce them into new networks. Use your power to be generous and say, okay, this is what it looked like for me. And I suspect you're doing this now, Anne. You're very generous with introducing people into networks that they may not be able to get into, but because of your perch of power, you can.
Pay it forward. Pay it forward. Thank you. Many thanks to our incredible panel for their insightful responses. Do we have time for a question? All right, I got a thumbs up here. All right, I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience.
There's one up there.
Oh, boy.
Hard to see.
Hi, thank you so much for the wonderful talk. One thing I feel like I often hear is we shouldn't care what other people think about us. Like a way to lift ourselves up and be confident is to ignore the haters, just focus on yourself, focus on what makes you feel good. I feel like that at times could potentially come into conflict with building your personal brand and caring about how you are perceived and how you make others feel in the way that you interact with them. So how would you reconcile those two things, which I could imagine there are times when both are valid, but I would love to hear your perspectives on it.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think a lot of people do think about this a lot, pretty frequently. And I would say taking an objective data approach to the feedback that you're getting or the way other people are thinking about you is really important because, I mean, this is being held at the Asia Society, so I'm going to make a sweeping generalization here, which is most of us likely grew up with parents who cared a lot about what other people think. I mean, in Urdu and Punjabi, there's phrases for this that are literally like, what are people gonna say? And so that becomes really embedded in the mind when it comes to like building a business or building a brand. And so the impulse can be to reject it completely, which we hear nowadays, or to absorb it, which is what we've been doing for generations. But the middle ground is in having an objective evaluation of if there is truth in that, what can you learn from it, and what can you intentionally reject so the power remains with you, right? And there's this phrase I recently learned, which is, it's not your fault and it's your move. So the way people think about you is not your fault. You know, structural racism, late stage capitalism, all of these patriarchy, colonialism, all of those things are not our fault, and yet we receive the blowback, right? We receive the end of that. And so while that's not our fault, we have to choose our move. And that requires first and foremost to be self-aware, to have an objective distance from the feedback, to evaluate it very effectively, to reach out to your network and ask them how they see it, what's true, what's not, and then adjust in a way that's still aligned with your values. So coming back to my previous example that I shared, like I didn't become the loudest person because that just wouldn't have been true to who I am, and I would have hated meetings and it would have given me anxiety. But I shifted something so that I could adjust that perception people have of me. So that's what I would say to that.
Very powerful. Thank you. We have time for one more question from the audience. I'm so sorry. With the spotlight, we can't see you too much.
I'm pretty lucky.
Hi.
Sorry. Hope I can ask more questions. First of all, thank you so much. Thank you so much, and thank you so much. I even took some videos and photos, sent my wife, saying, you see, that's how girls can to be in the future. You guys are representing such a great messages. In addition, I do have a question. I relocated myself, my family, from Shanghai to the north of America, Canada, years ago. I used to think I can change some mindset, saying, this guy, he's from China, he's from Shanghai, so he knows nothing about global. I was sometimes like, what the hell are you talking about? Are you saying Shanghai is not global, international place? And you are from a middle town, nowhere, saying, I don't know about business? But still, I relocated, I can still find the tagging. It's so hard to remove it. Like, you know, he spent 15 years in Shanghai, he still knows nothing about global. When we talk about global, they tend to exclude some regions from this global map. Your voice doesn't matter, you don't know global strategy, and your engagement, your real engagement is somehow different than we think. So to tend to put in a group saying, you know, for the opportunities, better not use them versus them. They know more about global. I'm not sure if you have experienced those tagging experience, and if you have, I would really love to have some tips. Hopefully that's a question I can bring up. Thank you.
Sure. Oh, I should take that one.
Take it away, Anne.
Okay. I do love this question. So I have a quick funny story to tell you because my experience is the same way. I'm a second generation American. So my parents were born in Taiwan and immigrated here. I was born here. So I've sort of sat in this place where I never really felt Asian enough, never really felt American enough, and then wound up to be part of a global business, ultimately running a big global organization. There was a point in time I remember we were doing this strategy session, and those of us that had global responsibility had learned an immense amount about our people, our markets, and all of these other things that were out there. And many people that were in the room had not had true global experience. And I remember our industry is filled with acronyms, and there was this acronym called Rest of World, okay, ROW, all right? It is a reflection of how ethnocentric all of us are, because we're tied to our origin story and where we live, right, where we're from. And one of my colleagues, who was also part of the global team, stood up and had the world map was on the was up, being projected, and he stood up and he said, "Okay," he used 3 fingers and he said, "This covered the United States. Can we please call it most of world?" Okay, so it's just a story to just show the power of the fact that of this incredible global world and economy that we live in. So here's what I would say, we are all a function of our experiences and our biases, right, and our origin stories. And so it would be impossible to expect every person to have an equal appreciation for the market opportunities, towards the workforce challenges, the demographic shifts, the economic dependencies, the geopolitics, whatever the case may be. What I have found over time is in the context of business, it's best to talk about the opportunity in the context of business speak, right? What is the market opportunity? What are the customer behaviors and demographics? What is the investment opportunity? Where is the money flowing from and flowing to, right? To try to achieve that common language, right, of business. And then also to try to help educate others who may have less, call it, cultural sensitivity and awareness about how to do business effectively, right, in other places all around the world, no matter what your vantage point is, if in fact that is part of your growth strategy, right? And so it's just something that you've got to constantly reframe, but take it back to the facts, take it back to the numbers, right? Because business people speak the language of growth, speak the language of, of profitability, of market share, right? So to make sure that you're tying it back to facts that are relatable, and then to talk about the nuances of the unique marketing plans, the unique workforce strategies, the unique investment opportunities that we may face. And I found that to be reasonably effective. And then also, to the extent that you can do this in your role, is to give others opportunity to have those kinds of experiences, even if not in a rotational role, but also on projects, right? The more people that you expose to more global learning and global perspective, the better off we'll all be. So I hope that helps.
Did you call it Mao or Mo? M-O-W.
M-O-W, M-O-W.
Yeah, okay. Mao.
We never said Mao.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah, right,
Okay.
no, yeah, right, no, we're not going to say
Yeah, bad
M-O-W,
idea.
yes, M-O-W.
Thank you so much. That was very enlightening. Great way to end this panel. Thank you again for your time and all the great advice that you shared with everybody here. And hopefully you can all read up on their books and all the social media ways of networking with them. You've got great options here. Thank you very much, everybody.